Last week, Katie and I went to the audiologist so I could have a hearing test. The audiologist was this bright young woman. I don't think she was much out of high school. She had pictures of her husband and her two young sons on the desk. She gave me the usual test with the beeps and the buzzer. And when we were done, she said, "Your hearing is barely adequate in the lower ranges, and it's way below normal on the upper frequencies." I said, "What?" She said, "You need hearing aids." I did not like hearing that. I did not want hearing aids. To me, hearing aids mean old age and dependency and being feeble. But she said, you have glasses to help your eyesight, so you're going to have a device to help your hearing. Same thing. So I said, all right. So when I read the gospel lesson for today, I just had to sort of laugh. I think God has a sense of humor because the gospel story today is about hearing. Jesus says to the Pharisees, "You're not hearing me." And I'm wondering, is this God's way of telling me, "Bill, you're not hearing me"? One day when I was a kid, my mom told me to put my dirty clothes in the clothes hamper. And when she said clothes hamper, that reminded me of the basement, because that's where the clothes hamper was. And when I thought of the basement, I thought of the television, because the television is in the basement. And when I thought about the television, I thought about Hogan's Heroes, which was going to come on the next night, and we all loved Hogan's Heroes. Next morning, I told my mom, "I don't have anything to wear." She said, "You didn't put your clothes in the clothes hamper. Why don't you listen?" I said, "I did listen, but I forgot." In the gospel story today, Jesus is in the temple and the Pharisees are pestering him. "Why do you keep us in suspense?" they say. "If you're the Messiah, just say so plainly." But they don't really want to hear what he has to say. They've already made up their minds that he's an imposter, an outsider, and a threat to their status as the religious ones in Jerusalem. So they literally can't hear him because they've made up their minds, they've closed their minds. And Jesus says to them, "You don't believe in me because you don't belong to my sheep. My sheep hear my voice, and they follow me. I know them, and they follow me." In Jesus' day, all these sheep in the village would be brought into the village sheepfold at night to keep them safe. And in the morning, the shepherd would go out to the sheepfold and call his sheep. And the sheep would know his name, and so they would separate themselves out from the rest of the flock and go out with the shepherd to find pasture for the day. Now, the sheep knew the voice of the shepherd. And so Jesus says, "My sheep know my voice." And what Jesus is saying is, if you don't want to listen, you're not going to hear what he has to say. And it makes me wonder, how many times have I failed to hear what God has to say to me? I'm pretty good at asking God for the things I want. I usually have a long list of things I'd like God to do. Take care of this, watch over this person, keep my family safe, guide me during the day. But how often do I actually sit down and listen to God? Probably not enough. It's a lot easier to be a talker than it is a listener. Every so often I have what I call coffee with God. So instead of my usual prayer time, I just take my coffee and I sit in my chair and I just try to listen. Quiet my mind and be silent and see what God is saying to me. And when I do that, I turn my mind off for a little bit. I try to quiet my mind and make it still. My mind is like a monkey. It just keeps jumping around from one thought to another, and it's really hard to slow it down. But if I can sit in silence with my cup of coffee, it helps. It's like when we listen to another person. How many times have I been listening to someone and I can't wait for them to finish because I'm already thinking the things that I'm going to say to them after they finish? That's not listening. Listening to God is called discernment. Discernment is when we're trying to sort out what's coming from our own mind as compared with what's coming from God. It's all too easy to confuse our own voice with the voice of God. I want a new Cadillac somehow becomes God wants me to have a new Cadillac. It's all too easy to do that. So how do we listen to God? What is it that we're not hearing? I think God speaks to us in many and various ways. It's usually not by a literal voice in our heads. I think God speaks to us sometimes by sort of an insistent urging in the back of our minds. You should go see so-and-so. Maybe you should apologize to someone. That's little voice in the back of our heads. That might be God speaking to us. Sometimes it's another person. Sometimes it's Katie. Sometimes someone says something to me and I realize later, maybe God is trying to say something to me. Usually takes me a while. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. My flock knows my voice. So we are God's people. We are God's flock. And if we're willing to listen, we believe that God will speak to us in some way. Sometimes I read in the news about someone who claims to hear the roar of God's thunder. It's usually judgment wrapped up in certainty. They just know. But I wonder, have they ever listened to the still, small voice of God? I have my doubts. Jesus said, my sheep hear my voice. But do the lions of our society hear his voice? The tech bros, the corporate suits, the billionaire egos? I have my doubts. I think they might just be projecting their own thoughts onto what is their image of God, which happens to look a lot like them. So they're a different kind of Pharisee. How can we hear what God is saying to us? I think God often speaks to us by giving us a different perspective. When you walk a mile in someone else's shoes, you get a different perspective. When you learn about a different culture, you get a different perspective. When we listen to people with different views than our own, we get a different perspective. And I think that may be sometimes the way God speaks to us. God doesn't always just affirm what we already believe. The trouble with the Pharisees is that they weren't willing to listen to Jesus. They already had their minds made up. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. My sheep know my voice and they follow me. So we keep our minds open to God and what God is saying to us, and we listen to the voice of our shepherd. I'll close with a poem about how hard it is to pray by Marie Howe. It's called Prayer. Every day I want to speak with you, and every day something more important calls for my attention. The drugstore, the beauty products, the luggage I need to buy for the trip, Even now, I can hardly sit here among the falling piles of paper and clothing, the garbage trucks outside already screeching and banging. The mystics say you are as close as my own breath. Why do I flee from you? My days and nights pour through me like complaints and become a story I forgot to tell. Help me. Even as I write these words, I am planning to rise from the chair as soon as I finish this sentence.